Welcome back. Florida is once again the state with the most in play this election season. The latest average of polls from Real Clear Politics has Trump just up a half a point over Clinton with 29 electoral votes at stake. It could give the Trump campaign a needed boost on Election Day. Our state has gone red and blue, voting for George Bush in 2004 and Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012. So what will happen in this contentious year? Joining us more on the final days of the presidential campaign are Cheryl Wilson, the chairwoman of the Manatee County Democratic Party, Republican State Committee man Christian Ziegler, and Susan Nylon. She is covering the election for the Associated Press. Thank you all for joining us. My goodness, the polls are all over the place. We could talk about the reason why a little bit later, but we referenced the Real Clear Politics average. On the other hand, there was another poll by William and Mary yesterday, shows Hillary Clinton up by 8. So, number one, how come the polls are all over the place? And Cheryl, you're new on our show, so let me ask you that.
I have written off the polls earlier in this cycle.
How long ago? About a week ago?
No, probably about 3 months ago. I lived with them in 2012. I checked them 3 or 4 times a day and wouldn't let them get out of my sight. When I began to see the fluctuation and just the change almost hourly, I decided that we will go after the votes, and we'll see what happens on November 8th.
Christian, I would imagine that you are quite pleased with the events of the last week in terms of how tight it got, but is anything a given at this point?
No, nothing's a given. I mean, I agree with Cheryl on this. I mean, you know, polls are one thing. You cover the polls, and the media makes a big deal out of the polls. The only poll that matters is actually Election Day. So during this final sprint, it's her job to get the Democrats out. It's my job to get the Republicans out. And that's what we're going to do. That's what both parties are going to do. But I think it's a very close race. And it's important for voters to know that it's a close race, so they definitely do go vote.
Let me ask you this question, and Susan, I'll have you weigh in on it in a second. One of the fascinating things about that William and Mary poll that came out yesterday, and it was a rather small sample size, but it showed that 28% of registered Republicans who have already voted have voted for Hillary Clinton.
Oh, look, this is, I mean, you look at all these polls, I just don't think, I mean.
Well, I can tell you, though, they also base that in previous experience as well. Usually for Republicans, it's the moderate Republicans who come out during early voting and vote. And there's a history of about 25% of that to cast their vote for the Democrats. So it's not unusual.
Yeah, but when you look at, like, if you look at the state of Florida, there's actually in the past about 2 years, 2.5 years, 10 counties have flipped from a Democrat majority to a Republican majority. And the Democrats in the past 4 years have actually lost 400,000 registered Democrats that have turned Republican.
Right. Exactly.
So when you start looking at that, you know, that's a big deal for the Democrats when they start looking at that. They start losing their registration on the Republican side. And I think that momentum has really been generated by Donald Trump, especially during the primary, so they could come out and vote. There's a lot of voters that are moderates, independents, that are coming out voting for Donald Trump this election.
I wouldn't necessarily say they would go from Democrats to Republicans. I think a lot are going to independents more than anything else.
One thing I think the Democratic Party is very strong in, though, is the analytics. And when we begin to see these numbers, what you're referring to last night, I couldn't help but go in and look at some of the identification telephone calling that we have done through the months leading up to this, and then checking to see whether those people had turned in vote by mail ballots, for example. So the analytics tend to be buoyant for us to think that maybe that we are seeing that here.
And that's an interesting point, because I've seen a lot of stories about this on the national news, that if people in surveys, even if you're a moderate Republican and you indicated that you might vote for Hillary Clinton, there was a pretty strong effort to get those people to the polls early.
Yeah.
So that perhaps is where that number is coming from.
Well, when you look at even early voting, and you talk absentees and you talk early voting, I think we're on day 8 or 9 now. Republicans are actually leading in early voting right now. So when you start looking at that and you compare the Republicans versus Democrats, I think there's a little bit of worry. Even the Tampa Bay Times, they had an article today that the Democrats should really keep an eye on this early voting because Republicans are exceeding expectations.
You're quoting that because you were quoted in it.
No, I wasn't quoted in that article.
But I agree, though. Democrats are usually strong on early voting, and Republicans are usually stronger on day of voting. But there is a little bit of shift right now. So
now, see, the information we get is quite the opposite. We are just now beginning to catch up in the early voting. So we're very pleased with the outcome of what we're seeing in the early voting. We're
well, maybe I'm
closing that
confusing
gap.
early voting to just mail-in ballots as well.
There is another subject I want to broach here, and maybe this will carry over into our second roundtable, but it deals with that it turns out, voting by African Americans is down from levels in 2012 and 2008, but on the other hand, I heard that Hispanic voting is up by like 100%.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, no, I don't think 100%. I heard more like 8%, higher than it normally is.
No, at this point in the election, from comparing it to 2012, it's almost double the number of Hispanic voters that have already voted.
I have not seen those numbers. I will tell you the numbers that I've seen is African American votes right now compared to 12. It's only 55%. That's the lowest out of all the minorities and ethnicities that they're using. And the highest is actually the whites, which is at 80% of all white over 65 has early voted compared to 2012.
Why don't we take a short break? We'll have much more on our roundtable discussion and a look at our full forecast when we come back. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we are discussing the home stretch to the presidential election and how swing states like ours can make a difference. And our guests include tonight Cheryl Wilson, the chairwoman of the Manatee County Democratic Party, Republican State Committee man Christian Ziegler, and Susan Nylon, who is covering the election for the Associated Press. Cheryl, let me ask you this. How has the demographics shifted or are shifting in Manatee County in terms of minority voting and the bottom line in terms of voter registration in Manatee County?
The population growth has impacted it a bit. The Hispanic population is more represented overall. Black population, I believe, has remained somewhat steady, but we're seeing a big increase in voter registration, and those groups were very much targeted in voter registration. We also have some activity there that has excited and motivated the Hispanic community. So we're glad to see what's happening there.
What race are you focusing on?
In Manatee County, we have a young man in Bradenton, Eleuterio Salazar Jr., who is running for mayor. It's a nonpartisan race, but he is a progressive Democrat, and he has reached out and is reaching across the board and across the aisle in the city, and is getting a lot of attention and getting a lot of support. So we think he has also energized a lot of the Latino voters who will come out to vote for him, which should also then impact our overall vote in Manatee County. Because,
Susan, Democrats generally had some gaudy ideas when Hillary Clinton's poll numbers were rising in Florida, and the hopes ranged everything from defeating Marco Rubio to winning a lot of state house races and state senate races. Has that all but evaporated?
I wouldn't say that at all. I mean, I don't think anything has happened in the past couple of weeks that have changed anybody's mind about who they're voting for, no matter which side it's on. I think that, it's always been a problem getting people to vote down the ballot, and to convince them of that is what's really our focus. However, on that side, I don't think that her poll numbers are not that much different than they were a couple weeks ago. So,
but to be specific, there's the Frank Alcock, Greg Steube race. Alcock believed if Hillary won by a good margin that there would be a coattail, that in that race, with the number of moderate Republicans in it and the relative positions of Steube and Alcock, that might be an opportunity. Now, I don't know if it so much, although both candidates are working hard.
Absolutely. And we saw that with Barack Obama in the 2012 election. It was the same thing. If you look down the ballot, even at a local election, candidates on the Democratic side polled, their numbers were like 45, 47%, much higher than when it was an off-year election.
Christian, I saw you shaking your head.
Yeah, I mean, what you just stated there, that's under the assumption that Hillary Clinton's going to win Sarasota County and be able to help that down ballot. I mean, when you look at Sarasota County, I think McCain, it was pretty tight. It was like 211 votes. McCain won. But then if you look at 2012, Romney won by 15,000. So,
and the Democrats still did really well.
But when you look at Sarasota County, what you're going to have here, Trump's going to win Sarasota County. every Republican race on the ballot, outside of probably tax collector, because she has so much name ID, and that's going to be a difficult race to win, but we do have a good candidate. But we're going to win every single race in Sarasota County, just as we always do every cycle.
Oh, get out of here! You do not.
Yes, we do.
They
Yes, we
don't.
do. The only Democrats in
Really?
office is a tax
Probably an
collector
entire
and a House
city.
member that they've carved out this incredibly gerrymandered
You know,
seat.
we have a saying in Bradenton and Lakewood Ranch and Palmetto and Parish that Manatee matters. And what we try to stress there is they don't give you any stars for winning the county, but our votes very much go in that Florida total.
Absolutely.
And we exceed our registration in those votes. So our job is to get out every Democrat that we have in Manatee County and get them to the polls, and they are going to go in that Florida total. So you might not get a star at the county level, but you get a big trophy if you win the state.
And you get a star at every single metropolis, every single
But
city.
that's not
is
good
all
for the
Democrat.
local Democratic Party in Sarasota County specifically.
Well, that's true.
Because obviously
Yeah.
they're trying to get their wins under their belt, but they just can't find any victories in Sarasota County.
Let me shift gears just a little bit, because what's been weighing on my mind and a lot of people's minds is the nature of this campaign. And you could look at both sides if you choose to. But what a lot of people who are thoughtful regret is that we're not talking about issues so much and opposing the other person for their politics, but I dare say that there are people on both sides, and we could argue maybe which side is more intense, but they have to hate the other side. And I can't imagine, we have two party officials right here that either one of you like what you're saying.
Yeah, I appreciate it. No, I mean, I would agree with that. I knew this election when you came into it and Hillary Clinton was running, that at least on the Republican side, it would be the #1 motivator was to defeat Hillary. I mean, more so than any of the individual candidates that are running. I mean, you look at Hillary Clinton, her past, and just at least on the Republican side, what we've seen with their history, and now you sprinkle on top of it all of this email stuff and the FBI and all that, that just puts more fuel onto the fire.
I got to go ahead. You finish. I got to disagree, but go ahead. I'll let you finish.
I thought you were here with the AP tonight.
But that's my point.
I thought you were here with the AP tonight.
Go ahead, Tina.
I'm with her.
And you say that.
I know you guys
say
are. I
that,
know you guys
but
are.
I have seen an amazing amount of Republicans from a higher level endorse Hillary. I have seen an amazing amount of Republicans who spend money.
There's a
getting
reason
her into
why.
election.
It's because you have a
They
guy
think
like
they can
Donald
actually
Trump.
work with her.
No, you have a guy like Donald Trump that's running against the establishment. So the people that are not supporting Donald Trump, that have been in elected office, that may have run for office before as a Republican, they're worried about what he's going to do to the system. So this is a very anti-establishment
With
candidate
good reason,
that is
yes.
really worrying people what he's going to do to the system.
But my question was the nature of how we're going about this, and the question is whether you could take a look at a lot of the Trump supporters who and the rhetoric they use. You could talk about the Democratic supporters and what they think of Donald Trump, which is pretty negative. And I'm talking about what is the nature of our politics here.
I've been out at a lot of the early voting sites, and it has gotten very picky and pushy as the early voting has gone on. It was somewhat quiet between the two sides going back and forth. It was busy voting, but there were peaceful coexistence at those early voting sites. As this early voting is going on, it's gotten a little more snippy as it goes. And my concern is what happens on November 9th or what happens on January 21st.
Sure.
Where do we go from that? And that is probably the downside and the tragedy of this election is what has happened to our political dialogue and how we relate to people who might view things a bit differently than we do. And again, trying to remember that we do have something to accomplish.
But when just real quick, Alan, when the media talks about what is the nature of this race, why aren't we talking about issues? All they have to do is hold a mirror up. Because when you look at all the reporters, they want to talk about what someone said, what someone did. Obviously, the FBI stuff, people want to focus on that. No one's talking about the issues. The media is not focused on the issues, so they can't really criticize the candidates or the campaigns or even the public for being focused on stuff that's not specifically the issues. They have their
When Director Comey's letter went out last week, that is news.
That is news, absolutely.
However,
Wait, hold on one second.
Yeah.
When the tape came up of Donald Trump on the bus from Access Hollywood, that's news.
It is news, but when you start looking at that and you're wondering, why aren't we talking about issues? Look, the media is a 24/7 machine. They got to fill every soundbite. They got to get that word out there. And when they're doing that, they're going to focus on the sexiest topics because they want to sell ratings.
Ms. Media?
Yeah, well, I
Sure.
got to say on the flip side, your candidate is probably really happy we're not focusing on the issues. Your candidate can have that excuse of saying,
No.
I would have talked about the issues, but they're not interested in that because I haven't seen anything, even when he's out campaigning.
There's a lot of,
have we seen anything about the issues?
There's a lot of blue-collar workers that are Democrats, blue-collar Democrats, that would totally disagree with you. Because when he's out there and he's talking about trade and he's talking about illegal immigration, that really resonates with the working class. And that's why Donald Trump's going to get a lot of that vote in Pennsylvania. He's going to get a lot of it in Florida, across Ohio. That's why he's surging in Ohio. So when you want to talk issues, when he's talking them, he's actually getting cross-party support.
Let me give Cheryl the last word.
Yeah, and when he's talking about women, that's an issue. When he's talking about women's health, when he's talking about women's rights, when he's talking about women's stature, that's an issue. And we need to pay attention to the words that Donald Trump says about that issue.
All right, we have to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll have final thoughts from our guests, plus comments from last night's show. Welcome back. 6 days. We're only 6 days away from choosing the next president, unless it's another 2000, and it'll be another 2 months. Our guests tonight join us for final thoughts on what could be a big week ahead. And, you know, I was watching CNN a little bit earlier. They were doing all the gaming of all the states, and it incredibly might well get just down to Florida again. And I want to get your perspective on all that. And Christian, I'll start with you.
Yeah, no, it's always Florida. I mean, you know, you can have this map with all these nice, pretty colors across the whole country, but really all that matters is the state of Florida and the 29 electoral votes here with this toss-up state. So, you know, as we close out this campaign, you're going to see Donald Trump. He's going to be holding rallies across the state, trying to motivate, get in the news, you know, at every media market and energize people to vote. And I think the Democrats are going to do the same thing. So it comes down to Florida. Every, you know, voter in Florida, you got to go vote. You got to make sure your vote's cast because you have a significant impact on the direction of this presidential campaign.
Cheryl, let me just ask you, do you wish that the Clinton campaign paid more attention to Manatee and Sarasota counties?
We have a very active staff in Manatee and Sarasota, and they again have put up some really good numbers. Our vote by mail numbers are quite good. Our new voter registrations are quite good.
I mean, in terms of visits from...
Visits, yes, except we have an election to run, so you know, I'm glad to stay focused and stay on the phones and send those young people out knocking on doors. I was thrilled to see Vice President Biden here a few weeks ago, so I think that's quite good for this. But again, I think when we begin to perform and show that we are closing the gap, that we're growing, that we're changing those dynamics, I think we'll see people here.
Susan, how do you see things trending?
Well, you know, first of all, I want to say we are not the same state that we were in 2000. So I know we cringe with that thought, but I think the important thing is to understand that we are truly a purple state. And the dichotomy of having a Republican-controlled legislature for decades to the fact that we've been voting Democrat in the higher races for just almost, not as long, but pretty close. So we are truly unpredictable, and this race has made us even more unpredictable because even with the pockets of people within the state, you can kind of predict early how they're going to vote. You just can't do it this time.
Christian, can you predict how this is going to turn out?
No, this is Donald Trump's going to win. No, but
I can't predict.
I mean, in all honesty, when you look at Florida, it's a toss-up. I mean, you can look at these polls. These polls are going to go back and forth. I think it comes down to that last inning. What kind of at bats do you have? And you know, right now, I think the momentum is on the Republican side when you see the FBI stuff and all the stuff, the Podesta emails coming out. But
it wouldn't be 11 o'clock on election night if Florida weren't in play,
That's right.
and that's just where we'll be. I was able to have lunch with the young man that was working for the Clinton campaign in the primary, and I asked him about November 9th, and he said, we're going to prevail. It's going to be close.
And we'll have to leave it there. But before we go, we want to share with you what some of our viewers are saying about last night's topic. As part of our Suncoast 2037 series, we are looking ahead at how our area will change over the next 20 years. Last night, we were discussing the impact of sea level rise. Experts predict it could rise 6 to 10 inches in that time, which could bring tides in the hundreds of feet inland. Here is what some of you are saying. Rebecca Sif Sager writes, I've been teaching my high schoolers on the topic for the past 3 weeks. Hopefully our future generations will be well informed enough to fix what we have done. Eric Swatek writes, sea levels are rising, period. I don't care who you believe is responsible. We should mitigate it. And Anthony Marinelli writes, yes, let's all panic. Well, if you'd like to join the conversation about tonight's topic, just visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/news@7. And FYI, want to check out past Roundtable discussions? They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. I want to thank all our guests for being here tonight. Cheryl Wilson is the chairwoman of the Manatee County Democratic Party. Christian Ziegler is a state committee man for the Republican Party. And Susan Nylon is covering the election for the Associated Press.